Good morning, everybody.
Okay, here we are.
This is, looks like one of our pages didn't go live. I'm not sure why that is. I'm going to click it again. But this is Transmission, episode 26, Viral Origins. So let's just give people a backdrop to this. So yesterday you posted an article from Newsweek.
Right. So first of all, we should introduce ourselves.
They know who we are, but just in case you don't, I'm Mark Van Steenuyk.
Maybe we shouldn't introduce ourselves, actually.
Yeah, you're getting so much crap, and we've already gotten crap for even wanting to talk about this. But I'm Mark Van Steenuyk, the director of the Center for Prophetic Imagination.
Yeah, and I'm Daniel Wolpert, the director of Tinfoil Hats Incorporated.
Yeah. So let's or the Minnesota Institute for Contemplation and Healing, right? And Tinfoil Hats. So Newsweek wrote an article, and it's being reported elsewhere.
Actually, about two articles actually.
And you posted it, and then you got a backlash. So maybe tell us the story.
Right. So suddenly I went from this reasonably intelligent, mild-mannered person to a complete whack job psychopath, and I don't think I changed that much in 18 hours. I don't know. Maybe I did.
The beast finally came out.
Yeah. Yeah, but and what this gets to, and one of the ways we talked about setting this up. So we did a broadcast on conspiracy theories last week. I don't know, 10 days ago, something like that. And one of the things that we talked about there was how there is this very interesting and strange kind of line between healthy suspicion of what large systems, particularly governments, are doing or are not doing that they're not telling us about, and then full-blown delusional conspiracy theories.
Yeah, the difference between having questions and wonderings,
right,
and thinking you know the answer in a very complex, narratival sort of way.
Right. Yeah. Well, and we appear to have found that line. I think I've stumbled upon that fine line.
So what's the story?
Yeah. So here's the story, and again, part of this I think is driven by the fact that these technologies are very complex, and a lot of people just don't really understand what folks are up to, right? So. So given a really quick summary of genetic research, so genetic research has been going on for years and years, and one of the ways that genetic research is done is by actually inducing genetic changes in organisms. And so first of all, there's a very natural, what we call a mutation rate, right? So our DNA makes mistakes, usually in replicating itself, or it's exposed to, radiation, ultraviolet rays, particular chemicals, and our DNA changes. And this is a very natural thing. It's happening all the time. It's actually a pretty predictable percentage of the time that this changes. And this creates what are called mutations. And through mutations, and studying them, we can actually learn what is going on with our normal genes. And in genetic research, one of the things that we discovered is that we can create mutations, usually by exposing organisms to toxic substances. So for example, when I was doing genetic research on fruit flies, and we were researching their brains. And let me tell you, flies don't have very much going on in the brain department, which makes
that's just mean.
It's just mean. I know. I'm being mean to flies, so it's okay. They can't talk back. We would expose them to high levels of nicotine, which is quite neurotoxic for flies, and we would create mutations, flies that were resistant to nicotine. And then we could study them and learn something about their nervous system, right? So changing the genetic makeup of organisms in order to study it, it's been going on for a long, long time. Now, the newest advance in this, of course, is what is called genetic engineering. And again, this is just changing the DNA of an organism. But now we can do it with great specificity, right? So we can actually put a particular gene into an organism, or we can take out a gene, or we can change a gene, right? And so that's what's called genetic engineering. And usually, those have been done for specific traits, but they've also been done to study all kinds of ways that organisms function. So that's the general scope of things. Now, in particular, in terms of viruses, one of the things, so people have been studying viruses, learning all about their genes, changing them around, trying to figure them out, doing all sorts of stuff. And of course, one of the conspiracy theories, right, meaning a theory for which there isn't any basis necessarily, and it's a lot of speculation, secrecy, is that this virus was created by genetic engineering, meaning that somebody put a gene in there, changed this virus, and boom, it goes crazy. That's actually incredibly hard to do and almost impossible to predict. It's sort of like winning this giant cosmic lottery that I just happened to make the right little change to allow this thing to go crazy. And there really has been virtually no evidence of that at all. But what Newsweek is reporting about is this other kind of research, which has now been going on for several years and is very controversial, which is research where you take a virus out of nature and you specifically study as it evolves and mutates. And one of the things about viruses, right, or single cell organisms, is that because they replicate very quickly, you can see a lot of genetic change, right? I mean, in human beings, if you only have one generation every 20, 30 years, genetic change is very slow. Viruses and cells, you can get a lot of genetic change very quickly. And so this particular idea behind this research was, let's subject these viruses to artificial natural selection and try to enhance their function, their pathogenic function. So in other words, take a virus out of the wild that was fairly benign or maybe caused an illness in an animal and see if we can study how it becomes more pathogenic.
As a way of kind of getting ahead of it so that we can create anti-vaccines.
Well, that was the theory.
Antiviral.
Yeah, that was the theory, that maybe we could learn more about antiviral drugs. Maybe we could learn more about making vaccines. And so this isn't a conspiracy theory. This stuff is going on. And there is a giant worldwide consortium, very heavily funded from countries all over the world, that has been doing this research off and on since actually the H1N1 outbreak. And it's proved so controversial that during the Obama administration, the American funding of this was largely stopped because there are a lot of people that felt that all this is dangerous. We're not learning a lot from it. Now, it was then restarted again. At least the American support for it was restarted again a couple of years ago. The Wuhan lab was one of many labs around the world that has been doing this kind of research. So the question is, and again, it's not an assertion, right? It's not a definitely this is what happened. It's a question, right? So we're allowed to ask questions. The question is, was this kind of research in Wuhan producing coronaviruses that were much more lethal? And did one of them accidentally get out of that lab? Now, again, this is not the answer. This is not what happened. But it is a reasonable level of speculation, and seems to me some really good questions to be asking.
Yeah, and there's a couple of comments,
Yeah.
but maybe first if I could ask a clarifying question.
Yeah.
So, but in the article, that's what's being reported is, and this part of what I find fascinating, this exposes something. So it's not just that these Chinese people are doing sinister things. This is an international lab funded in part by the United States government and other agencies,
Right.
International agencies based in China. So it's not, it's so funny to me that, we're doing all this work in collaboration for probably economic reasons as much as anything else.
Mm-hmm.
And but then the public face of our government is like, China, like.
Yeah, no, I mean, that's
this sort of politicking.
Yeah, that's a hugely important part of the story. And it's not even that all the research was just going on in this one lab, right? This research has been coordinated, is going on in labs all over the world. Multiple countries are involved in this. Yeah, and this is actually something that happens often in science, right? There's actually a lot more international collaboration going on than people talk about. It's something that really could be played up in a very positive way, but is usually not talked about, and because it's far more. I think it's far more politically expedient for those in power to try to pretend that all these countries are enemies of each other.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Here's a couple of questions before we dive back into this. I'm learning a lot from this podcast regarding labs and mutations. How did Daniel go from science life to spiritual direction life?
Okay, well, that's kind of a long question for another podcast, but yeah, that was just an evolution of my particular vocation.
Perhaps even a mutation.
Yeah, it may have been a mutation from a viral enhanced place in Cuba. Okay, Kathleen, what's up next?
Kathleen writes, I worked at Kansas State University in the 70s. I was shocked by how much of the research in the chemistry department was funded by the military, also the physics and math departments. I felt disillusioned. Most of us had entered those fields in hopes of making the world a better place, not to further weaponize the world. Mm-hmm. I mean, this is a bigger question. There's like a philosophical piece to this about, because the way we talk about things is there's this thing called science. That's like this monolithic thing out there that we need to listen to science as though it's one thing, and that it is basically neutral arbiter of truth. And we don't look at how political science development is and why we're researching some things and for what purpose. Again, it's just like agriculture.
Right.
Scientific exploration isn't always done for the people. It's done for other reasons.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's worth asking these questions without feeling like you have to be a conspiratorial nut job, as people tend to call.
Now call us.
Yeah.
Just me.
For even asking the question.
Rub up on you. Yeah. No, I think that is a hugely important point, and I've been thinking about that a lot during this pandemic, right? When somebody posts up, listen to science, as if they're cheerleading for their football team or something. And yeah, I mean, science is not one thing. And science is, as you said, definitely not a monolith. And there are all kinds of decisions that get made about which studies get funded, which ones don't, which areas of research get funded, which areas don't. And those are often highly, highly political decisions that are, either for certain purposes, like the military that Kathleen talks about, or they're maybe not for the military, but they end up benefiting the military, right? And the space program is a great example of that. I mean, there's all kinds of, cool, just sort of general sciencey stuff we get from the space program. But the space program has also very much been about military development, and that's
Space Force now.
Well, now the Space Force, yeah. But even way before that, in terms of materials, in terms of engines, all kinds of things. So yeah, I mean, this notion that science is just this nice fluffy thing that everybody's like, ooh, unicorns and rainbows, we're all doing science, it's great. No, science has the same kinds of good sides and shadow sides that everything else has.
Here's a great question. This is one I was pondering. Zeres writes, how do we respond to folks who will capitalize the reality of viral lab research situation to support Orientalist conspiracy theories and right-wing authoritarian propaganda while ignoring how deforestation, disinvestment, and sanitation and destruction of rural life and the military created conditions of a pandemic?
Yeah.
So even just talking about something bad that could have happened in China as a location, it does stir up all this sort of like Orientalist fear that Asians are crafty, deceitful people. This is part of the trope that was cultivated by our society, and that they're up to no good and they're lying about everything, whereas we are truth tellers and democracy. Like this sort of like us, them.
Yeah. So I mean, I see two pieces to that comment, which is an awesome comment. So this first piece, and that immediately came up on my page. I mean, people were like, see, the Chinese are screwed up. And I'm like, no, wait a minute. But we paid for this, right? So I think, first of all, we have to lift up this other part that, again, there is a class of globalized power structures that are all working together, even though they pretend that we're not. Right. And that it's very important to lift that up and come to understand that. I think then the second part, bringing up the issue about the practices that are leading to global warming. And again, the most likely issue here and the most likely explanation of what happened with this virus is that it was a natural mutation and a natural jump from a wild population to a human population. And a lot of that is being fueled by these practices related to global warming. And so but the two are interconnected, right? So to me, the same mindset that says we can do genetic engineering and control life forms is the exact same mindset that leads to global warming. These two are not different. They're together, right? And it's this basic mindset that we as humans are superior to nature, even though we're a part of nature, that we're superior to nature, that we know better. It's this kind of God complex. And, we have everything under control, right? And of course, it's part of my favorite part of Jurassic Park, right? Where Jeff Goldblum's, constantly talking about this and saying, no, you cannot control life, right?
Life will find a way.
It'll find a way, right? He says, first there's all the oohing and eyeing, and then there's the running and screaming, right? And so, I mean, right now we're in the running and screaming phase. Yeah.
To me, this raises some interesting questions because, and this is where a lot of the things about spirituality and conspiracy theories and everything intersect in my head a little bit, is this: we love narratives that help make things simple, right?
Right.
We want it to be simple, and so we don't even know we're doing this. Our society has all kinds of myths that just make it easier just to kind of go along with the story, so we don't question things. And so in the complexity of this, it's just easy to fall into one or two postures that I've seen. One is anytime we do anything with nature, it's bad. Vaccines are bad. Let's not bathe. Any sort of agricultural stuff that's beyond what you can do in your strict primitivist sorts of permaculture. There's all kinds of we need this to go back to being as feral as possible, which I have a lot of sympathies towards some of that. There's a lot of wisdom in some of that. But on the other side is science is good. We shouldn't ask any questions about Cargill or what pesticides do. We shouldn't question any of this stuff because science is good. And if you challenge it, it's because you're one of these whack jobs and you voted for Jill Stein. So it's like this sort of, right? It's just one or the other.
Yep.
Being presented. And and that, to me, that flattens all sorts of complexity of like different philosophical approaches to how science is done, different political approaches for who's doing what and why. And we don't have to be scientists to be asked these sorts of questions, and try to think about what does it look like to have a good life where all this stuff serves people and the earth.
Yeah, and I think that, the more that we are under stress, right? I mean, and this is where I kind of have sympathy for some of this. I mean, the more that we are under stress, I think the more that we desire simplicity, right? It's the famous thing like, well, just tell me what to do, I mean, the ability to sit in tensions with things, the ability to explore nuance, the ability to ask hard questions. I mean, all of that, I think, requires a certain amount of space and time and, a sense of, okay, I can do this and my life isn't at risk. And I think that, so I feel like the more our society and so many people become overstressed, the easier it is to divide up into these camps that have these simple answers and just say, that's the narrative I'm going for.
Mm-hmm. Just a couple of comments. This is a good one. Maria asks, aren't conspiracy theories complex? I mean, they can be really... There could be lots of plot twists, but my sense is most conspiracy theories, like they play on certain sorts of needs for certainty. And because of that, like knowing the answer, there tends to be a cutting off of complexities that don't support your narrative, right? So,
yeah, right.
But there's more to it than just saying it makes things simpler. That's true. It's not just that.
Well, see, I think they're complex in kind of an interesting way, which is that they're complex in that there's a sense of, I know a lot of secrets that you don't know.
Yeah, that's true.
Right. But then in the end, there's actually a very simple answer, right? Like once it's kind of like Gnosticism, right? I mean, once you know all the secret knowledge, it kind of comes down to this very simple thing. So it's kind of a funny twist on the issue of complexity.
Mm-hmm.
What does Kathleen have to say?
Yeah, this is an interesting one. I think raises some deeper questions. The Earth will be fine, but the Earth may decide doing away with us is the most efficient way to flourish. I mean, no. Like I feel like we're doing real damage.
Mm-hmm.
We are changing things.
Yeah.
And so the Earth will abide. I mean, there'll still be a planet here. But I mean, there's
for a while, but right. No, I mean, I think Kathleen, to me, what I hear you talking about is that, yeah, I mean, if we back all the way up to the big picture of the universe, right? Like, yeah, everything's going to be fine. And, I used to have a friend in Vermont that would say this all the time. She's like, from the perspective of some faraway galaxy, like everything's fine. And with or without us, there'll be a planet here for a while. Of course, when the sun supernovas, at some point there won't be a planet. Maybe that's the next thing that'll happen next week. And then we'll be like, man, we were all stressed out about this virus. And now the sun is supernovaing. That's really bad.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I mean, there's, again, and this is to me, this issue of being part of nature. I mean, we are part of nature. We are a creature that has evolved on this planet, and creatures come and go. All the dinosaurs were here and now they're not. And right, so at some point it's perfectly reasonable to assume that human beings as creatures may disappear. And that may be as a result of some of our activity, that may be the result of some external activity. It may be the result of some crisis that, either we have a hand in creating or not. Mm-hmm. And I think that engaging that existential reality is actually a very helpful and powerful spiritual task.
And I think it does raise questions. Sometime I think it would be good for us to talk more about uh, I don't know if you're saying this, Kathleen, but it raises this question in my mind. Like, there's the folks who want to talk about humanity as though it's a virus, which gets, I'm going to throw a big word out, Malthusian, the idea that somehow people as a species are the problem, or is there specific dynamics within humanity that's a problem? Like, is it like governments or the rich or certain things that are particularly exploitative, which, I mean, it's worth talking about, I think, at some point.
Yeah,
But
well, just the ego process. I mean, that's what spirituality does say, that yes, there is something off about the human being that causes a lot of problems. Hey, Catherine, what does she got here?
This is going back to conspiracy theories. I agree that sometimes it is simplicity, but I wonder if there are other attractions as well, like scapegoating, secret knowledge, a sense of control over the uncontrollable, etc. Yes, I think that's true, and I think that adds nuance. And I think we're pointing to some of this. To me, it's conspiracy theory in some way gives you a handle on it,
right.
And so that requires some sort of cutting off of facts that don't fit into your narrative. So in that sense, it simplifies. But yeah, there's motivations for this. It's not just I don't want to think about it, so I'm going to simplify. It's who's ultimately to blame. It's not who we think it is, kind of logic. And then somehow the people who it is to blame happen to be part of this enemy group.
Yeah. Well, and I particularly think what you lift up here about this sense of control is really a big part of it. Yeah, like, it feels good if I have this secret knowledge that nobody else does, and now I can impart it to other people, and now I understand something that nobody else understands. That actually feels very soothing, I think, on a certain level. And then she added something.
Do you think that widespread conservative Christian theologies and nationalism in the U.S. Primes people to believe in conspiracy theories, especially those that dovetail with those narratives? Yeah, I think it's true, because Christianity, well, maybe a lot of religions, but I can only speak to my own. I think there is this sort of tendency for scapegoating. Yeah, that's rich in our history. But then it's also like, Christian type nationalism really has a clear list of enemies. And so if you want a good conspiracy theory, needs some enemies.
Right.
And it's interesting how this shifts too. Like, so before World War II, fundamentalists in America were very anti-Semitic, because they even had this weird anti-capitalist strain where they thought, Jews were controlling the global economy sort of thing. World War II happened. That was kind of a sad set of things that happened. And then all of a sudden, fundamentalism shifted towards being Zionistic. And then anti-Semitism is still there, but then it's like, we're going to shift who our scapegoats are.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
It's just, but I think fundamentalist religions need scapegoats.
Yeah. Yeah. And so, what I was going to say about that is I don't think it's in any way unique to conservative Christian theologies. I mean, I think, again, human beings, and we got at this a bit with Gareth, with telling stories. We've talked about it, about worldviews. I mean, human beings are meaning-making machines, right? We're constantly trying to make sense out of the world and our experience. That's just what we do. And again, that's not bad. We have to do that to survive. I mean, if we don't know the difference between, a radish and poison ivy, we're just going to get a rash on our face. I mean, we have to understand things. So yeah, I think conspiracy theories are simply a particular type of meaning making that arises out of fear, out of anxiety, out of a whole host of drives and desires. And I think we see it in most cultures, for sure. And of course, people who are hardcore atheists say that about all of religion, that all of religion is just some kind of, nonsensical conspiracy theory, essentially.
Right. Science kind of also claims secret knowledge that leads to control, or the ability to control.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah, and to me, that's part of the thing. Like, that's why I feel like science should be as transparent as possible. Mm-hmm. To keep that, because once things do get secretive, because conspiracy theorists love things are always secret, but we actually do have secrets. There are things kept from us, and, and that we should know.
Exactly. Yeah, and that's why the thing about this lab thing is it's so interesting to me to see the reaction, because in this day and age, genetic labs have gotten incredibly sophisticated with sequencing DNA, which, again, when I was doing this work was like this pipe dream. And I was actually working with and studying under some of the people that invented all the technology to be able to do this. My guess is that every single virus that they have in all these labs, they have the sequence for. And then people keep really good records, right? It's all in computer files. Like, it would be very easy to simply say, we're going to release on, computer dated drives, we're going to release to you the sequence of every virus that we were working on in this lab. And you can compare it to COVID, this COVID virus, and you'll see, we didn't have that virus in the lab. And that would sort of solve the problem. But again, there is a very powerful pull to continue to be secretive, because there are economic interests, there are political interests, there are all these other interests that lie behind this nice vision of, beautiful, pure science.
Time for one last comment. This is Kathleen writes, our scripture tells us that we were kicked out of the garden. Maybe it was a way of admitting that we haven't done much to improve the environment.
I like that.
I think it's largely true. Again, this is something that's stirring in my mind that I want to kind of process in the future at some point. There definitely is some cultures have done better at it than others. And so one of the things I want to be aware of is like who the us is. I mean, Western civilization has done a lot of horrible things with indigenous populations who are way better at it. So I don't want to just lump them in, but at the same time, the sum totality of human activity has not been very beneficial for everybody else on the planet.
No.
And we can learn to do better. That's the thing. There is hope for us to learn to do better. We're not condemned to just destroy ourselves. I want to believe that.
Yeah, and I think that's what all spiritual practices get at, is they look at the basic human condition and they say, we need to do better. And then we point, they point the way towards that path. But, all right, well, thanks for sticking with us, even though we've become crazy lunatic whack jobs.
Apparently.
I really appreciate you being here. Feels good.
And we'll be in touch about our next episode, which is undecided as yet. And thanks for being a part of this conversation that touched on so many different themes. Really
appreciate all the comments. That's the best part for me.
Thanks,
all right, bye.